Fine. I'm gonna hit record and we're just gonna go off and running. But well, welcome back, folks. This is another riveting edition here at Guest Rose, the virtual edition. We are joined with Anthony Torres. This has been a long time in the making. A few reschedulings on both parts here, but we finally nailed it down and got Anthony's calendar in between remodeling his bathroom. So thanks for joining us, Anthony, finally.
Yeah, I'm glad to be here.
Awesome.
I would say we were hounding you down, but really it was our fault that this kept getting pushed back, but we're glad to have you here. For folks that don't know you, can you give us a little intro on who you are, what you do at Indigo, and we'll go from there.
Yeah, sure. So I'm a software architect at Indigo. I've been there for 2.5 years, I think, about now. I'm doing architect work for about a year, and then prior to that, I was working on as a software engineer building APIs for the research portion of Indigo.
Nice. All right, we're gonna dive more into that later about that transition, both in terms of what you were doing from engineering to architecture, and also kind of how you've seen the engineering, architecture, software world at Indigo grow over that time. But for now, we have I would say a softball question. I don't know if it is. Fun question, unexpected.
Okay.
I devised this one up.
Yeah, this is all Brett. So I would feel very on the spot, but we're going to do it anyway.
Okay.
If you had to pick a movie character that embodies you, maybe from your favorite movie, maybe you don't like the movie, but who is a movie character that embodies you and why?
Oh, this is a tough one because I'm notoriously bad at remembering anything about movies. Yeah, I don't have one.
Okay, all right. I'll pick a new question. What is something, and you can't say that you're remodeling your bathroom because we already said that.
Yeah.
What's something that somebody wouldn't know about you?
Wouldn't know?
Correct.
Oh, you took a good one too. I mean, I fix basically everything. Like I work on my car and my house, and I do all my own work on basically everything that I can.
Have you had any major failures? Meaning,
oh yeah,
there was an issue once you fixed it.
How much time did you get?
Yeah, right. No, I think one of the most interesting failures was I was replacing something on the car, and I ordered it from like an after parts market, and it didn't fit, but I didn't know that. And so like, even though I was following the instructions correctly, it was never going to work. I brought this piece into the mechanic and I was like, okay, I give up. Can you fix it? And he's like, the hydraulic press couldn't even get this piece into where it was supposed to go. So there was no chance of it happening.
Amazing. How do you
learn these new things that like when you're tackling a project that you're unfamiliar with, right? And that you're just going to do it. What's your go-to method of figuring it out?
Some combination of YouTube and my family. So, I mean, I have people on my side of the family and on my wife's side of the family that are incredibly handy and like fix boat engines and, cars. And my stepdad built a 3-story addition on his house by himself and, well, one other guy. And so I asked these guys questions.
Do you want to come out? You want to come to my house?
Yeah,
I got some stuff to do.
Do you have any number sharing here?
Sure. Just I need some help with the ceiling, and then we'll swap.
All right, no problem.
I
Might be
paint.
Some leaks.
Yeah. I can paint. That's all I can do. Sweet. So let's so tell us more about your journey here at Indigo. Right? You've been here for 2.5 years, right? You're kind of an OG. I mean, let's be honest, right? So talk about kind of when you started here, and then kind of what you were working on, what things looked like, and the transition from being a software engineer into a software architect role. Was that a natural transition? Was something you always just like really wanted to get into quickly, or just give us that whole journey?
Yeah, sure. So when I started, we were still it was in a different building, like at 510, and there was like just a handful of engineers and a couple of desks. It was pretty ad hoc, I think. Everything was the projects were like, because I was working with the R&D folks, they just said, like, come up to my desk and say, hey, I need a thing. Can you build it? And it was me and two other guys. So we just started building things. It was very tactical.
When you say R&D, was it like the microbial?
Yep, exactly.
Okay. So for people who don't know what that is, explain that quickly.
Sure. Yeah. So Indigo makes seed treatments for some of our crops, corn, rice, soy, wheat, that are full of microbes that they get from the soil, and then they grow up in a lab and they do experiments on it to make sure that the seed treatments have positive effects on the health of the plant in stressful conditions like heat stress, drought stress, nutrient use stress. So the APIs or the services that we ended up building as the engineers was taking all of this data that was traditionally collected in, like, on pen and paper. We had a LIMS system, which is a laboratory information management system. And we needed to figure out how to tie all of these piecemeal bits of software together into a cohesive collection.
This is, when I say OG, this is before marketplace, before transport. This is,
oh yeah,
this is the guts of the Indigo early beginnings.
Yeah, and I mean, I didn't come from a biology background or anything like that, so that was definitely some learning. I could build some APIs, and then it was very interesting understanding the customer. I'm used to building web apps, and the data entry mechanism is totally different, and the way that they like gather and manipulate data is different from like a typical web user. So my initial approach at building a lot of things didn't resonate at all with them. So I had to like really understand how it was they worked and change my process.
It's wild. Okay. All right. Back on the journey.
Yeah.
Sorry. Little side road. But.
Yeah. So going back, let's see. So we built a handful of APIs and some web apps and tried to, convince the scientists that these web apps were the way to go. And in some cases they were, in some cases they weren't. And you'd rewrite it a handful of times. And then eventually, you deliver a product, they're happy with it, and then you move on to the next one. And so something that like for marketplace, for example, there's like an overall strategy, where you're trying to get to. With R&D, everything is a lot of prototyping. It's fun to see what things stick and what things don't. And like, there was even some projects that we worked on that really forced us to learn how to squeeze all of the capabilities out of AWS that we could, because we were working with files sizes that I wasn't expecting, and jobs that took multiple days to run. Like, now I feel like I'm rambling. Where we want to get to after this? So,
yeah.
So at what point did you move from, okay, we are a couple engineers supporting the requests that come up and we're kind of prototyping for kind of the R&D pipeline, to, okay, now we have a little bit more strategy and structure from an engineering team, and there's a need for architecture and things like that?
Yeah, so I mean, somewhere along the line, we had product managers come in who were working with the stakeholders and trying to figure out priorities and how all the pieces fit together, and if there were tools that we could build that would actually empower multiple projects. So that, I think that was just a function of product management coming in and understanding what Indigo was trying to do at the highest level.
At a point when we were starting to move into kind of external facing pieces of software potentially, so marketplace,
yes,
transport, that sort of thing. Okay, and so that's when software was kind of becoming a bigger piece to the puzzle of what we were doing.
Yeah, that timeline is right.
What were some of the big shifts you saw in terms of how kind of, I guess I would say broadly speaking, technology or software teams, so like product management, engineering, architecture functioned and has changed at Indigo as you've seen that transition?
Yeah, I mean, I guess at first I'd say there is all of that now. How have I seen it change? It's a little weird because, you know, again, with the R&D work, in its very nature, a lot of it was ad hoc. So it might have been easier for the R&D org, their leadership, to say, like, here's the next series of things that we want to do and build. And then the engineers were just like, okay, let's have a product manager prioritize those things and we can help execute. It still feels a little bit different than, like, when you go looking at the marketplace side of the house. I don't know that you're going to be able to draw the same parallels, just because the way that they work is a little bit different.
What's that relationship like between software architects and software engineering, right? And there is and maybe even product, right? Like, where in the ecosystem does software architects sit, and like, where does that flow of communication go?
Okay, so how we've seen it work, I can speak specifically to the R&D side of things, where it was architecture, product management, and then engineering were all working together to figure out how we could build a pipeline for processing our images and then storing the data, which can be used for, like, machine learning down the line. And so architecture was playing the role of like figuring out what infrastructure would support the requirements that product put together. Engineering was involved too, because they could say like, they needed to know what they were actually building. So what are we building? A command line interface? Are we building a web app? And then taking the documentation that I put together for the types of AWS infrastructure, we could, like, iterate back and forth on that. What does this mean? Well, what happens if the user has these use cases? Like, how do we support? One thing that was fun for me to learn in that project was we were using Glacier Deep Archive, because the amount of data that we would store would get unbelievably expensive over time. And so, but it comes at a cost, which is, if you want to recover the data, it takes 2 days. And what happens if we need to rerun these pipelines? And do we have 2 days to wait? So it was a negotiation between all of us, factoring in, like, usability and cost and existing infrastructure.
It's wild. So back to the point that you've been here for 2.5 years, and I don't even know the number of what Indigo as a company was back then, and even the engineering organization was, like, there to now, right? Some key, I guess, differences, and maybe that you've seen from, your day-to-day function, right, in the R&D world, right? How's it grown? How has it shifted? How has it changed? Like, it could be everything and anything.
Yeah, I gotcha. So I think one of the things that has definitely changed for the better is we're trying to standardize on tooling. So there was a lot of cases where in R&D world, the engineers would build a thing, and then in marketplace world, they'd build the same thing, and we weren't communicating. And, like, we had maybe a Python stack in one case and a Node stack in another. And so now we're trying to build reusable tooling. And then you can scale all of these new services up much more quickly. And something that we don't really talk about, which is a huge benefit of all of this, is this discussions that you don't have to have again. So it's like, oh, we've already decided what our API specs are going to look like. Like, let's stop having this conversation and then just build the meat of the product. So yeah, it's just a more efficient process now than it used to be.
So, as with your transition too, personally here? What's that change been like for you, going from a software engineer to a software architect?
Yep. I am much happier drawing boxes and arrows. Yeah, no, I mean, the difference is basically whether or not you get into the weeds about a specific thing versus, in my opinion, I'm much more breadth first as opposed to depth first. And the software engineers, are often better at like digging deep on a very specific problem and like squeezing all of the like optimizations out of that you can. And for me, I just want to like conceptually verify that all of these things will talk to each other. We've got interfaces at each system boundary, and we like can know in advance of building any of the really complex stuff that when you go from beginning to end, that like you'll be able to. There won't be any big missing blocks.
So you're happier now drawing the boxes and arrows.
That's the takeaway from this conversation.
Okay. All right, good.
That's good.
Yeah, your architect counterparts will be happy to hear that.
Yeah.
All right. On that note, I'm looking at the time here, and I know we've got to wrap up soon. Closer question. On the architecture team as it is today, it's a little bit of trying to get into the shoes of being on the team. What do you appreciate most about that team right now? Leave it at that.
Yeah, the job is hard. Like there's a lot of stakeholders and opinions that need to be considered when you're trying to propose a generic solution for an entire org worth of people. So like it's a mix of not only being able to like propose something that's good from an engineering perspective, but also from like a political perspective. You got to also talk to the business. So there's a bunch of translations that are happening between the different departments. And for me, it took a while to get used to the new language that comes with the role.
For sure. What's something that you've learned from one of your teammates recently?
It's an interesting question. I don't know. Eric's always showing me something.
I think probably anybody who ever talks to Eric could say that.
Yeah. No, I mean, now I'm learning about ABAC and PBAC and all these access control mechanisms. I've never even heard of these acronyms before, so I started reading up about them.
That's awesome.
Eric Weiler just huddled in a cabin in Maine, just shouting out info for people to learn. I love it.
Classic.
Yeah. Well, awesome. Well, hey, thank you again for taking the time to finally, we can finally get you on here. And I know this will be the first of probably many. So keep your calendar open. We'll look for the invites, but glad we're finally able to get this done. It's awesome.
Yeah, I'm glad we made it happen. Thanks for having me.
Yeah, thank you.
Awesome. Good luck in the bathroom. We'll talk to you soon.
All righty. Take care.
See you, Steve.
Bye.